everybody. We're glad you're here. It's a really good turnout. If you want to sit closer on the floor, by all means, come sit closer, get yourself comfortable. I'm sorry I don't have chairs for everybody, but it's good to see such a nice turnout. My name is Rachel. I direct and curate the ICA, so if I haven't met you before, definitely say hi to me. I'd love to meet you. And really excited and honored to have artist Reginald Sylvester II, who goes by Reggie, here with us today and to talk about his work in front of his work. I have some notes and things to kind of lead a conversation, but we also want this to be helpful for you guys. We want you to be able to hear from Reggie in front of his work. We want you to ask questions. Do you want them to ask questions as they arise, or wait till the end and have more of a Q&A?
No, I mean, maybe as they arise.
Okay, so if you have a question, raise your hand, and we can ask questions, and he can talk about your questions as we kind of move through a conversation. We'll have about, let's say, 45 minutes, and then pizza lunch will be in the lobby, and we want you all to have lunch. So please stay and join us for that. Also, this evening is the reception for this exhibition. It's from 6 to 8 p.m. It's drop in, drop out, and there will be food as well. So please return, bring a friend, or tell other people about coming back this evening. Reggie will be here this evening as well. So, well, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks everybody for coming. I didn't think it was going to be this many people. So thanks for coming to hang out and chop it up.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. You know, Reggie and I have been talking about his work for a couple of years. We do have some copies of his recent catalog available. You're welcome to look through it, or if you feel inclined and you want to take one with you, they're available for sale. But I wrote about Reggie's work a couple of years ago, and I got to think deeper about your work. And so it's been on my mind since. But maybe a good kind of icebreaker way to start is, we had some conversations thinking about the South, and you literally just walked in.
Yeah.
He just walked in 5 minutes ago to see this show.
Time.
So, what are your first impressions of your show? And what does it mean, you know, thinking about the South and showing your work in the South? And kind of give us some of your personal history with the South, too.
Yeah, I was telling the two fellas earlier, I'm really bad with names too, so please forgive me, that my mom lives in Atlanta and my grandmother lives in Carbondale, Illinois, so I would actually drive. We would go driving to see my grandmother. I would drive to Chattanooga like all the time. Only just knew it to like grab food, rest stop, you know, seemed like a big city. So to kind of have like a show that exists here is pretty like, it's pretty amazing, you know what I mean? For it to be a place that I'm familiar with, but my work is, you know, being shown here later, you know, years down the line. But I have a lot of family in the South. I spent a lot of summers in Natchez, Mississippi. And then, like I was saying, my mom is in Atlanta and my grandparents are in Illinois. And so I guess kind of like the Southeast, I have like this relationship or this like touch and go relationship with the Southeast. And I'm so used to kind of coming during the summertime, travel, visiting. But the show really looks incredible. I was telling Rachel, the works look so much smaller seeing them in this space. And I think the color works really great on the wall as well. But at the same time, like these works all exist, or came into fruition at very different points. I'm very much so excited about the drawings, probably beyond anything, because I've always wanted to show drawings and never had shown drawings. And so thank you, Rachel, for allowing me the opportunity to do this for the first time. And the drawings, I felt like as a maker at a certain point that if I wanted to be a stronger painter or artist, all the great artists that I love, they all had like rigorous drawing practices. And so the drawings really have informed the gestural paintings, which is a bit of my foundation, but at the same time, in some strange way, they've also kind of elevated or brought deeper meaning to my investigation with other materials in terms of painting, assemblage. But yeah, I think this is, and also as well as sculpture too. So this is like a very the show feels very centered, I think, from our practice, which is just great.
Yeah. What we kind of landed on, right, in talking about the show and the selection of work that we wanted in the show, what we landed on is a selection of work made over the past 3 years. And you tend to work pretty serially, right? So we've got on the wall back here, it's called Offering Zero, from your Offering series, of which you have a mini number. The works behind us, is this from your industrial painting series, from your studio floor, kind of thinking about
T1000.
T1000 series?
But it is very connected to the industrial painting, so
Yeah.
it's like a ladder.
The kind of movement to sculptural, like sculpture, from sculptural painting to sculpture, and we can talk about, the compositional cuts and that form, to welded metal paintings. The most recent work in the show, a welded tribute from 2024, and then I love the idea, and I definitely want us to talk about your drawing practice, and maybe we can start there, because you kind of mentioned that, is that you identify as a painter, right? You identify as a gestural painter, and that gestural abstraction is about energy, and it's about a moment and energy in the studio, and you came to drawing after to kind of reinforce your painting practice. So talk to us about that connection between drawing and painting, and maybe about your studio practice between those two mediums.
I mean, I'm definitely like one of those like people, and I'm sure it's many others. It's I've over time become processed, but I didn't start that way. I just kind of was like, I love painting. I love William de Kooning. I want to be a painter. I'm going into the surface and I'm making paintings. And I guess as I'm one of those people that learn as they go. And so before, I used to, if you look up any prior work, I kind of started in a cartoon expressionist. It's like a fancy way of saying cartoon painting. So I was making cartoon paintings before. But when I went to the Met for the first time and I saw the abstract expressionist wing, you're looking at Clifford Steele and Kooning and Franz Klein and all the guys. I was like, all these dudes are like superheroes, And so my goal over time was to always make abstract pictures. And then I got to a point by where I found myself feeling like I was just a colorist or someone who worked with texture at a certain point. And there was no language within the paintings. And so when you think about somebody like, I'll name de Kooning again, or like maybe Bryce Martin, or naming all the fellas, maybe like Cecily Brown or even Joe Mitchell, right? They also made works on paper, they also made drawings, and they had a language within their painting that really, to me, how I see it is, the language allows one to be able to shift the energy and color throughout the surface of the paintings. I thought that was missing for myself. So what I started to do is I started to make drawings every morning, like 10 drawings a day as an exercise. And really, I felt almost like I was becoming a writer. Writers have writer's block, or maybe if you get up in the morning, you're trying to journal. It seems like this easy thing to do, but it's really not that easy, And I would find myself struggling through making drawings, but as I got to the 5th or 6th drawing, things would loosen up. And what it did was it started to build a language for myself. And then I also started to look at things that interest me in the landscape in terms of what can I riff off of in terms of the drawings. And so I would look at lightning steals or cracks in the cement walking around New York City. You see kind of nature kind of breaking its way through the city structures. I would look at old willow tree branches or just tree branches in general. And I would take all that information and I would try to use that as a way in which to develop this kind of alphabet for myself in terms of drawings. And what I started to see is that it started to change my paintings. It started to make me demand or respect negative space within my work that I never really did. I used to paint to edge on everything, but drawing kind of started to change that for me. And it also started to kind of, I guess you get some witness of this in here too, but I started to, later on, I started to kind of use outside exterior materials, whether it be the brief in the studio or found objects, and the drawings actually started to inform how I would apply assemblage to the paintings as well too. So I think any painter, whether you're figurative, abstract, or even conceptual, I think drawing is like, it's grassroots, it's foundational, and it'll always change and repeat on where you might be currently. At one point, I wanted to just do it all. Like when we were kind of talking about ideas around the shop, I sent you that diagram and everything. And then Max always freaks out. He's a partner and friend, colleague of mine. And I was like, man, I just want to do an all drawing show. So this was easily going to be like, all works from maybe recent, and I put the idea behind it. But yeah, I would love to just, I haven't been doing it as lately as often, but I find myself at my favorite coffee shop making drawings, and, working out ideas for sure.
Mm-hmm. And this grouping of drawings is called Cracks via Sky and Earth, and we can definitely pick up on some of those things that you were mentioning, you were looking at or referencing when you were making those kind of morning automatic drawings. And I like the connection, right, of seeing the gesture in your hand and the line happening there and happening, let's say, for example, in a vehicle behind us. Can you talk about your hand, right, and the difference in which you employ your hand, right? Sometimes it's like a gloved hand where you're physically on the work, but I imagine this also involves some brush work as well.
Yeah, it's I'm a bit of at odds in the studio because I don't know for you all who are art. This is like probably very cool. Who's an artist? I'm sure. Raise your hand if you're an artist. So,
talking to artists.
Tons of artists in here, right? So you ever find yourself like you're interested in one thing, but you're also interested in a million other things, right? In terms, and sometimes the art world will tell you, or when you look at artists, you know them for focusing on like, they have one side of their practice and they investigate that for their entire life, right? That's their life's work. For me, it's very different because like, I don't want to be that artist. I think my favorite shows are retrospectives, right? When you can go and see like what they were making when they first started, and then all the kind of trial and errors, triumphs, failures, and then they get to this like master work. And so for me, like first, I'm a fan of painting. Like I'm a nerd. Like I love gestural act. There's nothing. A collector told me one time, painting is king. It will always be king. So like, there's something very heroic about a man or a woman who can go to a blank surface and just use medium and a brush and create something. I think that's just, that's like Superman flying or something, right? But then at the same time, I'm very much so interested in materials and like what a material can command one to do in a relationship between one and the material. And I don't know, the metaphysical natures of a material, right? Or pushing a material. So, or the histories of materials. And so I find myself always in the studio on one end, like my studio is broken up into two sides. And one side is gestural paintings, another side is more conceptual, ideas or material paintings. And even this hand is kind of showing that, right? It's one side is this all rubber painting where I tried to make a gestural painting actually on this surface. It didn't work out. I wiped away at it. This is what I was left with. And the gesture kind of lies within the cut that changes the form of the kind of entire work. But here is a full gestural painting. And there's some connecting points whether it's remnants from the studio. And I guess to go back to your question, this is a painting where I'm wearing gloves and I'm wiping away at everything to get to a desired surface. And where here, I'm kind of using everything that's available to me. I'm using my hand. I'm also using a brush to make the line work. I'm also using the debris from the studio. But I guess to sum up everything, it's I always want to. I don't who's watched that documentary, Painters Painters. Is it Painters Painting? You've seen it? Yeah. So it's like, it's like it doesn't get better than that, right? It's like would love for people to kind of look back on me, when I'm not here, or people to consider me as a painter's painter, because I want to make pure painting. But at the same time, I don't want to negate the urge or the interest to investigate materiality or conceptual ideas. And so I'm always kind of going to go to and from to and fro each kind of side.
I like imagining your studio as kind of a little bit bifurcated.
Yeah.
Which I think is interesting, and maybe students have questions about your studio practice, and that might be something you can elaborate on a little bit. Just what a studio practice looks like for you and how it's evolved or grown since you moved to New York, which was, less than 10 years ago, 10 years ago.
About 10 years ago. Yeah, I think the studio practice for me, I think you have to paint every day, no matter if you feel like you can hack it or not. Paint every day, draw something every day, write ideas every day. I hate that galleries are closed on Mondays. I would see art every day. But I mean, I get up in the mornings. If I'm having a great start, I'll make drawings. I'll go to the studio and I'll make. Right now, I'm making gestural paintings because there's this interesting thing for me going on in the studio. Is a bit personal, but it's like these paintings. They're very processed, and they're about going to the studio, stretching the rubber, getting everything set up for the paint day because the paintings come rather quickly. So there's less therapy there with those works. But for the gestural paintings, which is what is encompassing the entire studio right now, those are giving me life. You know what I mean? That I'm able to get up every day and look forward to making those works. Sometimes I leave the studio feeling like shit because I can't stand the last thing that I made. But I try and get up and make something every single day, and whether it's a triumph or a failure, I think painting's about pushing. So and it's about paintings for me are timestamps as well. So you always want to leave off somewhere so that you can pick up the next day. If you're not painting, then that's not gonna kind of happen, So, but yeah, I guess my studio practice is every day. I'm kind of just going in, I'm making works, I'm making drawings. I also, at the same time too, if there's an idea or a shift, I think my paint will shift every 6 or 7 works. And so if there is a shift, I don't shun that away. I'll stop everything to go down that road, that shift. Like Welded Tribute kind of came out of that, out of that shift. It was me making the industrial paintings for a certain amount of time. I was making the offerings, and I had this idea, and I started making the sculpture, and then I had this idea how can I kind of take all this language and all this information that I'm gathering and bring it to one surface. And I just pivoted and started making these with the foundry that I work with. And I think, for better or worse, I had to make it because I had to learn from the process of making it. And even though this work is very different from Vehicle, or Vehicle is very different from here, I would have never made that work unless I had made Vehicle. I would have never made Vehicle unless I made the offerings. And so I guess I say that is to say, if you have those ideas, work them out. Even if you're exhibiting, because a lot of exhibiting artists, right, they shy away from showing the ideas because they put them in front of the world. The world tells them they're bad. There's this meltdown, but you have to go for every idea because that in some way is gonna show you, it's gonna show you a way to the new idea. Or even if you see things that other artists from the past are doing and you think they're doing it great and you want to try it out, don't be afraid to. It's not for you to hone in on that space and call it your own, but it is for you to learn from that experience. And we all are individual vessels, so you'll take that experience, but through your vessel, what you put out will be vastly different because your personality, your inner self, it'll reflect itself on the surface as well too. So. I'm sorry.
No, it's great. This is great. Does anybody have a question though before I just keep asking questions?
So as you were talking about the materiality and your studio process, I'm curious if you ever analyze previous work that you're not really into anymore, and maybe you're using it for a new work.
Oh yeah, boom. There's like 4 or 5 paintings of them. Like if you look closely, you'll see kind of some of these like mirrored or like shadows of like marks that have been covered up. Even some of the debris that's on here is built up paint. And I find myself like where I work in New York, I work in Ridgewood or Maspeth, these areas is where like all the car shops, like all the junkyards are at. It's very industrial, and I find myself I'm interested in discarding. Like if there's a bunch of junk on the ground and like train tracks and mud, and I mean I love riding behind garbage trucks and like old 18 wheelers because there's some of the most beautiful mark making on the back of those things that like only can be made by time. So me even working with these works is me really trying to replicate that as best as I can. But I always like, listen, making art is expensive. So it's like if you have a surface that you're like, I know I could have killed it or I could have did better on that, cover it up. So what? I don't always do that. you want to keep something. I'm in a place now where, because I work really fast, and so like I have these works that I've recently made, and then they led me to something new, and I have about 8 of them, right? And I was like, now that I'm excited about this new thing, I was like, okay, I'm gonna reuse these services for what I'm trying to train myself to do for archival purposes, is right. It's like it's not about kind of like getting rid of everything. It's like let's keep the best examples of this because at some point somebody's gonna look back and go, well, hey, how did she get here? We want to have that evidence. And so I've made those mistakes. But don't be afraid either to, more questions.
Does anybody else have a question?
I have a question. You mentioned a couple of times like these are fast. You work fast. Like how fast? What does that mean when you say you work fast?
So I think I'm impatient. I'm an impatient artist. I'm trying to get to the next thing as fast as I can, but I understand that art needs time and it can take time. And so I guess when I say fast, every 6, maybe to 8 paintings will shift. And there's like a learning curve or understanding. And I think for all of us, it's like as artists, it's like if you dial in, you'll notice that. If you just line everything, if you line 10 paintings up or 5 paintings up, you look at them, you'll go, okay, what I was doing in painting 1, I'm not doing in 10. And what I've been able to do, or what I think has worked for me is, what I'll try to do is, I'll try to lock in on the most interesting part of a painting and then expand on that. So I might make a whole work and everything else in the work is, maybe not rated that well, but there might be one interesting element of that painting, and I'll try to make a painting based off that space. And so I guess when I say I work fast is, the more that I work and the more that I'm painting in the studio, the faster I have those realizations, and then that means there's a shift, shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. And so I was just talking to some close friends a few weeks back, and I sent them 3 different paintings, but they all were made in like 2 weeks time frame. They look like they could be 3 different bodies of work, and I was trying to get their opinion on what they felt was the strongest, or what they kind of related to, or what they gravitated towards. And they were asking about this is so different from, this first painting is so different from the last. But I guess that's what I mean is I kind of see shifts, and some artists, I'm not going to say all, but some artists won't acknowledge the shift. They'll just work through kind of that body of work, and then they'll stop. For me, if that shift comes in 2 paintings, I'm turning. I'm making that. I'm going into the next phase. I hope that answers.
Next question.
You said you were faster than information artists, so I was just curious about how often do you return to a piece before you decide it's done?
It depends. It depends. I'm trying to tell myself, give it more time, give it more time. I used to make paintings in one sitting. I used to make a painting in like a few hours and it'd be done. I move on to the next. And I think that happened a lot of the time when I used to have a good work studio, where I was living with the work and I was just trying to get something on the wall, make it and kind of do away. And then when I separated the home and the studio, the works naturally have more time because it's like, okay, I'm tired, I'm gonna go home, I'll come back, and wherever I left off, but it depends. I do now work maybe takes a couple of days because my better half, she gets mad because I'm like, I'm at the studio all day, I come home and I'm in my phone looking at the painting. She's like, let's watch a movie, pay attention to the video. But yeah, I take about a few days with works. And then some works, depending, like I have a show coming up next year, so works are naturally, because that date is so far ahead, the work will naturally get, more grace and more time. I don't think it's about, some artists may feel like it's about this immediacy thing, right? Like I have like action paintings, you have to make it an action, and it's about that. And I think it's a bit about that, but I think we all should have an editing process, right? And so what I'll try to do is I'll start somewhere, I'll leave the studio, I'll feel like it's done, but I'll take an image and I'll look at it on phone, and I'll deal with the painting in terms of it in real life and on digital. And so I'll go, what's the painting missing from when I look at it in the photo, opposed to when I'm looking at it in real? And sometimes I'll load it up on Instagram and I'll use the little drawer to like doodle on it, or if I block this place out, block that out. So works I'm giving the works a little longer time, but some works, if there is a thing of overpainting a painting, and I find myself a lot of the time too where I'll over edit and then I'll overpaint the painting, and then I have to like get rid of the whole thing, and then I'm mad at myself because I just lost this moment. I just did that before I left. I went to the studio yesterday and I had this small painting, and I'm also an emotional painter too, so I showed the paintings to some friends, and they were like, I like this one, and I felt like this work wasn't good, so I was like, all right, I'm gonna destroy it. And then like I'm looking at it the last 4 days, and I'm like upset that I destroyed it. Like I should have left it. And that, to kind of answer your question, it's like you gotta kind of pick and choose, because once it's gone, and it's, sometimes you win or lose. So I've been trying to give my skip paintings a little more time. But if you do something and it happens fast, just because it happens quickly doesn't mean that it's not good. You might have just arrived there very nice, and I think that's why drawings are so great, because drawings are immediate, unless, there's artists that spend a lot of time, but there's something about that immediate kind of gesture, and then it appears in front of you too.
You talk about making shifts. When you have that urge to make a shift, do you go immediately to a new canvas or whatever and start to work on that, or do you work it into what you were doing?
I go to the next surface.
Okay.
I always that painting that I learned from, I always like to keep it, because now it's a gem. It's a lesson. It taught me how to get to that next place. And so I think for me, it's like that's that. I guess even going back to like your question, it's like that's that evidence. Any painting that has taught me anything, I'm keeping. And I also try to keep it for myself too. I try not to sell it. I try not to get rid of it, because I think that's also a thing too. Great paintings, if you're making a body work, artists keep bodies of your own work. But Offering Zero was a painting that I learned from. It changed the last 2 years of my career as an artist. And I've been trying to hold on to this painting and go back and look at it and relearn, from this work. And so, but I do go to a new surface and try and take that lesson into that aspect.
Thank you.
So when you have a show that's a year out, do you have work that you've selected now for it? Do you do a combination of like, we'll see where you evolve and then submit that? Like how do you decide that far away what you're gonna submit?
Hard, like to just stick to a place. Just like Reggie, just do this. Make these. The gallery's gonna come in. They're gonna want to look at it. They look at galleries and curators. You love to see. Everybody loves to see evidence. The more evidence you have, the better. So if I'm just like I'm making this type of work and I'm making a bunch of them and having all that evidence built up, that's great. I'm just letting them know that's not probably just going to be the case. There's going to be different kind of places. And so But what I am trying to do is I am making a decision beforehand that this show is just about painting. So there's no offerings, there's nothing about materiality. This is me, this is the surface, these are gestural paintings, and that's what this show is going to be about. So that's kind of like a forethought or a decision I'm making. Now, what those gesture paintings are going to do and how they're going to live and activate, there's already some shifts happening, and that's why I was having that question. I was telling you about showing it to my friends because I'm trying to make that decision kind of now, even though it's a year out. Because I've also never really, which is a new challenge for myself, I never really sat in one place for 9 months and just strictly made. And it's going to be weird trying to do it, but I think it's also going to be an interesting practice for me. But people that know the work, they're like, you're not. We think it's this now, but I mean, yo, working with Rachel, there was a whole concept for the show.
There's a few concepts for this show.
And then you were like our artist said here, I'll try to change, the show that I had before that I showed these works, I changed the date. I got the show because it was a body of work. And I hit them up like 2 months before, like, here's a new show title, here's a new show, here's the new works. They're like, hold up, you know? So you do have to, because when you're exhibiting, when you're showing, you do want to kind of make a decision, right? That way you can kind of tie the loose ends and make the connection for the viewers, because as like selfish as artists, as us artists can be, it's about me. You also want to consider, I'm starting to learn for myself, you want to consider the viewer. You want to consider who's been watching the work, who's looking at the work, and you don't want to lose them. You kind of want to walk them along too. And so I guess that's kind of what's kind of putting reins on my decision for this. It's like, this is going to be my first show in New York for a long time. I just want to give people a pure painting show, and then that can kind of carry people to some of the other things.
And I'll kind of jump in both to touch on your question a little bit from my perspective, right, and our relationship with each other, and to maybe launch you into a conversation is, thinking about that balance between spaces and institutions and planning cycles, which are generally slower and longer, especially with an artist like Reggie, who has a very fast painting practice or a very fast studio practice where he is moving from one series to another very quickly. The way we started to think about this show, again, was kind of representing moments in his practice over the past few years that represent different series, right? Within the offerings, there's an entire body of work, and we're showing the first one from the offerings. But hopefully showing that this is one artist, right? This is one vision, and that you can start to piece together the jumps or the transitions happening both between material and context and your thinking process. So to that point, do you want to kind of walk us through the evolution from the past few years? I'm looking at offering 0 and gate 0 here, and maybe a starting point is to talk about that form, when compositional cuts kind of entered your canvases, the exposing of the substrates, right? And you can see kind of this approach mirrored in these works, but they have different surfaces. We've got rubber, we've got steel, we have canvas, and wood, right?
So I got to a place by where I felt like pure painting wasn't enough, right? I needed a material that was that had a history, that had really some different textural sensibilities and qualities to it that can do more for the painting. So I started making these paintings called refuge paintings, and they're made on military tent shell halves that I started collecting from the late 1960s and 70s. I was listening to a lot of record right now, Jimi Hendrix. And I was like, I want to from this era when Jimmy was performing and war and stuff was going on.
Your father was a Marine?
And my dad's a Marine as well, so I was around military tarp a lot, and that kind of started this kind of material kind of exploration for me, right? This is material that I've been around. My father, it's tied to how I grew up, things like that. But then it was like it wasn't enough, and so I started to go to like the hardware stores around the area, and I would go to Home Depot. And I was just like going to Home Depot and just like going there for like an hour. Probably thought I was trying to steal something or something. I'd be there just like walking, but I was just searching for like something. You know what I mean? And a lot of times with art, right? A lot of artists, it's the history or kind of like the academia behind the material, right? That drives it first. Then they work with it. I'm not that guy. I want the aesthetical the material itself, how it feels, what it looks like. If it moves me, if I think it looks cool, if I like, I'm buying it, even if I don't use it. Like the rubber sat in my studio for about 8 months before I even got the confidence to work with it or even know what to do with it. But what attracted me to it is that it came on a roll, just like a blank canvas. And I was like, all right, I'm gonna buy a roll of this, and you know, maybe I'll plop it on some canvas, or I don't know, I'll figure something out. But when I finally got the confidence to stretch it over the substrate, and I tried to make this gestural painting, and I wiped away at the surface, I was left with the surface, right, where it's, you know, you see kind of these oranges and these kind of brighter tones kind of over this darker, and really the only reason why I used the darker tones was I was trying to blend it or mesh it or make it feel like the initial surface, which is this like ashy matte-like surface. And then I was left with the form with no cut. But at that time, I was starting all my paintings from the top. I would work my way from the top of the painting, I'd work my way down. But at that time too, I was very influenced in looking into I was really into Richard Serra and learning about his process and his practice. I was looking up architects I liked, Tadao Ando, how he would cut the ceilings out of his architecture. He's like this crazy island in Japan he did where he cut the ceiling out, he dropped the floor and filled it with water, and the sky reflects off of it, beautiful. And then I was collecting these old West African anklets that are supposed to be these heirlooms, but they all had this torqued form. They all had this like curvature. If you look at an ando from a certain degree, you get that shape. If you look at Sarah's sculptures, they have that curve. And I was thinking, and I was just kind of making this relationship between that and at the same time my gestures and my paintings. I always kind of have these like swoop gestures and these gestures that kind of mimic that form. And I thought, I'm trying to make this painting, like why don't I just change the entire form of the work and cut this shape out? And I also was interested in materiality, and a way for me to kind of get to that place was, well, paintings are made up of not just the canvas, but the substrate is holding it up. You know, it's what about me thinking about this painting in the sense of a ready-made sculpture, right? How can I expose all parts of the painting? So making this kind of torqued kind of cut and revealing the substrate and then painting the substrate. Now it's a complete painting, you know. And then some of the latter offerings, I started to kind of get into a monochromatic mode because they were all red, and I started to paint the substrates red too. So that's kind of how, an example of like how the material kind of led me down this pathway.
And you had mentioned you were taking that sort of cut form, art form, laying it on your studio floor just as a discard.
Yep,
And
as
then
a discard.
kind of thinking about those forms and the sculptures arrive.
For sure, yeah, I was left with, because I keep everything, you know, I try to put all the byproducts of the studio back into the work. And I was left with this form, which reminded me of the floor plans of the boats used in the transatlantic slave trade. And then it gave the form, or that kind of that leftover, it gave it some meaning. And I was like, oh, this is great, how can I, you know, and I started to think about that history. And so I thought, well, maybe if I take this oppressive form and I elevate it and I double it and I make it into this gate or this gateway to heaven that those souls can kind of pass through, then it kind of gave this whole idea of this kind of poetic kind of ideal behind the work. And so that's how the gate sculptures came. And I've always wanted to make sculptures, but I'm not a sculptor. I'm not trained to play with clay and paint or fire or ceramics or anything like that. But I was like, okay, this is a way for me to like use metals and steels and aluminums that I'm interested in, the surface qualities of those things. But this form is directly connected to my painting, and the paintings will kind of give way to a way for me to make sculpture too. So, but yeah, so I guess I'm trying to tie it into your question, but it's like that's kind of how those offerings started to come about. And although they're very different from the gestural paintings, they're very connected because these paintings taught me how to deal with surface in a way that I never was dealing with surface in my gestural paintings. And so a lot of the times now, some of those achievements or offerings, those are kind of the first steps to how I'm arriving to the surfaces of the gestural paintings, and the gesture starts to come later too.
And do you feel like this kind of cut form has become a motif for you in a way?
Now it's a motif. It's like almost like this kind of signature thing, and yeah, I mean, I guess it was just also a way for me to break up the surface and show all parts of the painting. And, I had also never seen anybody really do that with like gestural paintings at all, and now even the works now, it's like I'm not gonna abandon it, but I'm trying not to use the cut. I'm trying to just make full paintings, but I think for these different bodies of work, the cut it's about that. It's kind of about me trying to use everything that's available to me from different bodies of work and kind of find or arrive at a place to really kind of have that complete thought on the surface. I think vehicle for me is that, it's a way for me to kind of do what the offerings are doing. It's a way for me to do what the gestural early paintings. It's also to be able to show kind of an interest in studio debris and working with the discarded. And then it also kind of led me to, working with the all aluminum works. And I think with these works too, which was great, is that it was the first time that I took all the color out of my palette, and I only was working with silvers and blacks or iridescent paints in order to push my painting practice. I felt like if I wanted to be a stronger colorist, then I needed to remove all the color from my paintings. And now I'm back using color. It's worked in some way. In some way. Yeah.
Do you usually use oil paints?
I'm so impatient. Oil is like, it takes so long to dry. I'm using all acrylic all the time. I do think I'm a bit envious of oil though, because I like the smell of it. The smell of oil is like you walk into a space, it already gets your senses. But I use acrylic because it's just a quicker medium to work with. And what I like to try and do is the jars that I have, I leave them open for a bit, and I let them get thick. And so I try to build up the surface with kind of the thicker, and then I work with kind of the wetter. And so some people think the paintings are oil, but they're all acrylic. Don't let anybody, like some people go, if your paintings aren't oil paintings, they're not, but you can, the faith in the vessel is so important. Like you can push a medium to make it do anything, like you can push oil to make it feel like acrylic. You can do vice versa too. These are all
I think the paintings and everything is very interesting, especially because like pushing a medium you can do so much in just this space alone. But I feel like the composition of the actually blooms over the entire exhibit.
Sound
this
work.
one? Oh, the sound
Sound
one?
work. Yeah,
Oh,
let's talk about the sound work.
I love talking about that, especially with your use of like chop and screw songs and really sampling into that. It's really interesting.
Oh,
Yeah.
thanks, man. Yeah, man. Chopped and screwed. My girl's she's from Dallas. She's from Texas. And I think just loving hip hop culture, you know what I mean? Like chopped and screwed music has such a time, you know what I mean? And damn, I didn't even go in there and check that out.
Tell us what songs you're working with and kind of that remixing method, and it does loom over the show, or it's like the heartbeat of the show. It's there, and you can get up close with it, but it also permeates this space too. And kind of as our last maybe moment, because I know we're out of time, is you could talk about the title of the show, or just kind of this idea of the soul.
Yeah,
And
so
how are you using that sonic composition?
this is my third sound work. I, if I would have not been so last minute and thought about it, I probably would have tried to have some element of synth. But we all listen to music when we make work, and so I feel like it's also like an in, or like, viewers being able to kind of understand or feel what's going on in my studio as well. And so um, I listen to rap, I listen to some bands, I listen to oldies. These two particular songs that I kind of took riffs from was Inner City Blues by Marvin Gaye, and then My Life by Mary J. Blige. And I took certain parts, and I felt like what really gave me the idea is there's a chopped and screwed version of My Life on YouTube. I say everybody should go and check that out. But when I heard that, I never heard of Chopped and Screw's soul record, and I was like, yo, this is so sick. Which I on repeat. But what made me think about it is with these sculptures with the gates. I had a visit, and it's why it's good to have friends and talk to other artists and stuff. And I had a homie, he said, yo, these kind of remind me of tuning forks. And I was like, oh shit, they do. And I started to think about the way in which kind of you like hit metal or hit steel, that sound that echoes. And I started to think about Mary J. Blige's voice in the Chopped and Screws version of it. And I was like, yo, there's this relationship there. And I feel like when I'm listening to the voices slow down, that it's almost like, it's like penetrating the soul. It's almost like it hits you in like your core. And so does the last 11 seconds of Marvin Gaye's Inner City Blues. And so I tried to take those sounds and really stretch them out and kind of like highlight those, really give those kind of moments in the songs more life for people to kind of experience them and see how they will kind of reflect or give off on the works. So my vision is for me to, like, if I was to hit the gate, what sound would it give off? And it would be this music or this kind of soundscape. And I also just kind of, I'm really obsessed by like Matrix and Oppenheimer and like Terminator, post-apocalyptic movies, or like Blade Runner. And so I'm always thinking those soundtracks are like, Hans Zimmer's like, he's the GOAT, it's crazy. So I always would think about if there was like kind of a soundtrack or like a scoring to the show, like what would it be? And so this is also a way for me to kind of inch into that space. Rachel, this title is due to her. I can't take any credit. Groanings, which cannot be uttered. Her knowing about my work and knowing that like there's a spiritual quality that I'm always trying to touch on. Lord willing, that the work you kind of connect with. I think painting is a spiritual practice. I think abstraction is a faith-based practice. And so I'm always trying to kind of make relations between the spirit and what I'm doing in the studio. And when you brought up the Romans 8, it like made a lot of sense. It made just so much sense because this work for me is this kind of, when I'm in the studio, it's not, people also ask me like, what are you thinking about? It's not a joyous, some days are joyous, but a lot of the days I'm thinking about what I'm going through, shit that's going on in the world, excuse my French. And I'm conflicted. We all feel what's going on with everybody. Whether we kind of admit it or not. And so I'm always dealing with those things in the studio in terms of what I'm making. And so for this kind of like, when you mentioned the title and that, and then at the same time kind of thinking about bringing the sound work in, it's like a way for me to really kind of stitch everything together. Maybe these are those groanings. That last 11 seconds of Marvin Gaye's record, he's like moving for like a long period of time and then slowly goes into the instrumentation. Those are those groanings, those hopeful groanings. I think soul music is tied to that too. So.
Any last question?
You talked, Reggie, about the importance of like going to see work. Jewish galleries are open on Mondays, so you can see work every day. Why is that important to you, maybe as part of your work?
I think a friend of mine, Eric Mack, he told me I love the way he talks about work. He talks about his work really beautifully. I wish I could talk about my work as good as him. And I was asking him, how do I do that? He said, you know what? Somebody once told me when you go see shows, it's good for you to go see shows, and then it's good for you to write about those shows, and it's also good for you to write about your own work. And that'll make you a better artist overall, but it'll make you a better speaker too. And so Mondays are very naturally kind of slow days, and I wish, I try and go like to MoMA, if it's open, or like the Met, and it's open on Mondays, and I try and go see shows. But I think it's good to just, one, see what's going on in the landscape, like what your contemporaries are doing, or even artists a generation or two before you is super important, right? Sometimes you find yourself in similar spaces or different spaces. But I just think it's, in terms, for me, it's like, I just love being surrounded by art. So I can go see a quick show, take a mental note down, go back to the studio, maybe sometimes seeing somebody else's show gives me the courage to do my thing that day. Some days I wake up on I'm gonna fade. So that's why.
Well, join me in thanking Reggie. Thank you for being here and speaking.
That